Let me recognize the presence of FAO representative, ICAR, MAF, the private sector, directors of livestock, animal health, that is, and animal production, and private sector, of course, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And let me also thank you, the organizers, for allowing the OIE an opportunity to come and share with you what we can in this very, very important topic. We really appreciate that. I'll start my presentation. You have already been told that I'm going to be trying to talk about OIE standards regarding traceability and the level of compliance in Africa. I'll be talking about background information, both of the OIE and of the subject of animal identification and traceability, and also on the general principles on identification and traceability of live animals, the guidelines for the design implementation, the level of compliance, and conclusion. So as a way of background, I'm talking to the converted, you all know the OIE is an international standard setting body with particular emphasis on animal health, veterinary public health, and animal welfare. That is our mandate. And the OIE works through the OIE delegates, who are primarily directors of veterinary services for most member states, and there are 180 member states who are members of the OIE. Standards are constantly made and reviewed and approved by the World Assembly of Delegates at the annual general session. So the standards are very geographic, very democratic, all-encompassing, and so forth. No bias to any particular region or continent or whatsoever. And you will know that we are not the only standard-setting body. There is also our sisters, the Codex Alimentarius, which is on the issues of food safety, and also the International Plant Protection Convention, which is on the issues of plant health, and of course, we, the OIE, are on issues of animal health, zoonosis. So, in the way of background on this topic, I think you all know that animal identification is a very ancient practice in Africa. In fact, in Africa, animals are even called names. You identify them by names, by special marks, by brands, skin marks, colors, ear notching, ear branding. I come from this background whereby we used to know that animals of a certain color were normally known for a certain clan or a certain family within that region. That's how far back animal identification goes. And that time, it was primarily for ownership purposes, to prevent issues of stock theft, as we heard the Honorable Minister saying this morning. However, with time, with commercialization of the livestock production, there have been more complex modes of identification. We have seen the likes of ear tagging, tattooing, freeze branding, etc., for management purposes. And even further, until today, we have seen more complexity in the issue of animal identification and traceability, whereby now the emphasis is on animal health and food safety, as well as the traditional purposes that we described. And the identification devices have become more complex, and they have been exhibited in the hall there, and the experts are here, the private sector are here, who are showing those. We have the likes of boluses, digital ear tags, microchips, and so on and so on. Animal identification has to be redefined, has to be upscaled to even include registration. Registration meaning the collection, recording, securely storing, and making information accessible to competent authorities such as the veterinary services. So really the whole thing has been upscaled, as you all know. Animals can be followed individually or as a group during all stages of their life. That is the animal traceability that we are talking about. So traceability of live domestic animals and of products and animal origin has become a legal requirement and is crucial for international trade. You heard this being emphasized this morning by the Honorable Minister and the representative from FAO that for trading purposes, if you are going to trade, whether it's intra-regionally or internationally, you have to have some kind of a traceability system. And this is to provide assurance to consumers of safe and high-quality animal products. So many times we forget the person who is eating these products. That is the person who is calling the shots. And sometimes we tend to blame each other, veterinary services, for unnecessary and over-regulation, but they are listening to what the consumer is saying. So because of this important topic, Member countries in the late 90s, they requested the OIE to develop standards in this area. So there were a few activities. In 1999, there was a regional conference for the Middle East. And in 2005, there was a regional conference in Khartoum, Sudan. There was also another one, another international conference, which some of you were there, in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And the special edition of the Scientific and Technical Review of the OIE, this is a publication, of 2001, was completely dedicated to animal identification traceability. You can check that out on the website. I think it's www.oie.int/publications. You will see that whole publication there. And in 2004, there was a questionnaire which was run through the member states to try and get their feeling on this issue of animal identification traceability. And eventually in 2006, the International Committee, which is now called the World Assembly of Delegates, adopted what is called the General Principles of Identification and Traceability of Live Animals. I'm going to talk more about that. And also subsequently adopted the guidelines for the design and implementation of animal traceability. So those are what you see today in the Animal Health Code as articles, articles 4.1 and 4.2. So those are the only articles that prescribe or that mention the OIE standards on the animal identification traceability. So let's zoom on the general principles on identification and traceability of live animals. So this is now a standard. It has been adopted by the World Assembly of Delegates. What is its objective? To outline the basic requirement for the design and implementation of an animal identification system to achieve traceability without being too prescriptive. I really want to emphasize this non-prescription here because with animal identification, it depends on your situation. So there's no one size fits all. Everybody has their unique situation. It is very, very important. That's why even as the OIE, we could not prescribe do this, do that, do this, do that. We can only give general procedures and guidelines. And let me also remind you that a traceability system need not be too complicated. It can even be paper-based. It doesn't have to be ICT-based because I know one of the constraints is ICT, even though ICT makes it much easier if you have the right environment that is. So the principles, I think, what I'm going through now is going to be a bit boring to some of you because this is now those articles 4.1 and 4.2. You can literally just open the code and read them. And it starts with the identification. I don't think I'm going to save time by trying to not go into the definitions, but animal identification is defined there. Animal identification system is also defined there. Registration is defined. Animal traceability is also defined. So these are the general principles. If you were to set up, what should you have in your mind? That animal identification and traceability are tools for addressing animal health, including zoonosis and food safety issues. So relevant activities, as we heard this morning, issues of surveillance, vaccinations, herd flock husbandry, zoning, compartmentalization, movements, inspections, utilization of veterinary drugs, and so forth and so forth. So it will help you with those topics. The second general principle is that there's got to be a strong relationship between animal identification and product identification. There has to be a link between those two. I think so many times, especially in the veterinary world, we tend to get carried away too much with live animals, but let's not forget we have to trace them until they have become meat or food. And animal traceability and traceability of products of animal origin should have the capacity to be linked, like I've said, and we have to bear in mind what Codex Alimentarius is saying, because once you go into food, now that is in the field of Codex Alimentarius, which is our sister organization. And the objectives of animal identification and traceability for a country, zone, or compartment, and the approach used should be clearly defined following an assessment of the risks to be addressed and a consideration of the factors listed. So first of all, you have to know what is your purpose. You don't just implement it because your neighboring country is implementing it. You've got to have something that you are trying to address, the risks out there that you are trying to address, and you have to bring that into consideration. And they should be defined in consultation with Veterinary Authority and relevant stakeholders. It is very, very important, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that you involve all stakeholders, the industry player, the farmers, the private sector. there has to be involved in this. You'll find that this is going to be repeated all the time. Because sometimes veterinary services, maybe they're just trying to design these things on their own, and then they become so irrelevant and they don't make any sense to the farmers or even to the private sector. So it's very, very important that we don't leave, as much as the competent authorities, being the veterinary services, are the leaders, but you should bring everybody on board as well. And factors, those are some of the factors to consider when choosing a system. They are not exhaustive. The outcome of your risk assessment that we talked about, the public and animal health situation programs, animal production parameters, the species and so forth, types of production, animal movement, available technologies, trade in animals, cost benefit, as we had, cultural aspects. There are people who have certain cultural beliefs that sometimes can affect your program, so you have to take that on board as well. Animal identification traceability should be under the responsibility of the Veterinary Authority. There has to be some kind of control, and it is better controlled by the Veterinary Authority. Yes, there are other authorities which are involved there, but really the main responsibility should be lying with the veterinary services. And the Veterinary Authority, with relevant government agency, in consultation with the private sector, like I've mentioned, has to establish a legal framework. You know, with this identification systems, you are starting to manipulate people's animals, you are putting their ear tag, you are sort of infringing on their rights. There's going to have to be a legal empowerment of the authorities or whoever is doing that. It's very, very important. And the legal framework should also include other elements such as the relevant international standards, the objectives and scope, organization, obligations of parties, and so forth and so forth. So whatever the specific objectives of a chosen system, series of common basic factors, and these must be considered before implementation, such as the legal framework we said about it, the procedures, the competent authority, identification of establishment owners. So basically, you need to do a lot of brainstorming before you start the system. And you can even benchmark, share experiences with others who have done it to try, so that you don't reinvent the wheel. And if there are any other standards from ICAR and other FAO and other collaborating partners, read into that as well. And equivalent outcomes based on performance criteria than identical system based on design criteria. So basically to emphasize that it will not be fair to say that I will only listen to identification that is through the ear tags only. Whereas somebody can achieve the same objective through branding and so forth, or using symbolosis and other means of devices. It's very, very important to underscore this issue of equivalence, as has been said before. So those were the procedures. Now, these are the guidelines on the design and implementation of identification systems to achieve animal traceability. And by the way, these are basic elements we consider in the design and implementation of a system to achieve animal traceability. Once again, they are not exhaustive. A country should design a program in accordance with the scope and relevant performance criteria to ensure that the desired outcomes can be achieved. All stages should be designed and implemented in consultation with stakeholders. We've already heard about that. So the issue of desired outcomes is very, very important. What am I trying to achieve? Very, very important. I'm not just doing because it's in fashion. The scope, how broad, how many animals, what kind of animals? Shall it go down to all kinds of animals, or are you going to prioritize on your trade animals and so forth? The performance criteria, those are the guidelines to consider, and they continue. If you can do preliminary studies, because once again, this is forcing you to think about this subject before you delve into it so that you minimize mistake. Even try piloting it. Have a prototype, run it out, analyze and learn from those experiences, see how it's going, benchmark, and so forth and so forth. And the design of the system, design of the animal identification and system and animal traceability program must be a means of animal identification, registration, documentation, reporting, information system, laboratories, and so forth. And when it says information system, like I say, you can also run a manual paper-based system as well as an IT system, even though it might be cumbersome, but sometimes you don't have a necessary IT environment to go into that. The design of the animal identification and system and animal traceability program, continue, of course. There is the issue of also the abattoirs, the rendering plans, the dead stock, collection points, markets, the whole chain of a live animal to when it is now being disposed, is being packaged, it must be taken into consideration because all of those stages, they can be capturing vital information. There is also an issue of penalties. Sometimes it's not very nice to penalize, but it might be necessary because you have law, you have a legal framework, we all agree it's going to be done, it's been agreed, and where people are not complying, there has to be a bit of a a stick as much as a carrot. And the issue of legal framework, we have talked about it for the enforcement. Implementation must have an action plan. It's very, very important so that you are able to follow how you are developing this and whether you are delivering on time and so forth and so forth. This is the topic that I was very, very uncomfortable to talk about. This is the level of compliance in Africa. Really, as the OIE, we have not determined that, and it's a continental mandate after all. Maybe the AU, IBA are better placed, but ours are just subjective views about it, that we are saying that we have not objectively determined this, and we are largely speculative or subjective. However, uptake for food safety reasons is limited only to countries exporting animals and their products to countries with stringent sanitary requirements. You see a lot of that. Of course, maybe people are just thinking that we're talking about the EU only, but there are other countries. I'm sure countries in the Horn of Africa are exporting a lot to the Middle East, and countries in West Africa, they are also trading a lot between themselves. So where there is trade, you'll find that there's a bit of traceability. It might not be as advanced as elsewhere, but at least there is an effort towards that. The high cost associated with establishing a complete traceability system and the ICT infrastructure is a bit of an issue there, and it might be contributing to the slow uptake. However, it is an opportunity for trade, and member countries should innovate and design simple and cost-effective, suitable to their situations. It's very, very important, and like I said, don't think of a complex system all the time. And Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I want to say that animal identification and traceability is an important tool for controlling animal diseases and assuring consumers of safety of animal products. It provides consumers with accurate information on the source and quality of the products and their link to specific location and origin. You heard in the Honorable Minister's speech here that people need to know. They need to know whether these animals were raised properly, they were comfortable when they were in the farm, and they were raised by people who are well looked after. All those issues, it doesn't matter what we think. That's what the consumer wants, and we have to try and address that. And the system should be custom-made to individual member countries, given their unique situations. It should be designed by the Veterinary Authority in collaboration with stakeholders, as we have already said, for sustainability, for ownership, for success. As the OIE will continue to develop standards using the expertise available, which is yourselves, as well as in collaboration with partners to promote safe trade in animal and animal products. We are constantly reviewing and introducing new standards, and this comes through forums like this one. If the proceedings, if the outcomes from this meeting are such that there is some objectively backed issue that can be taken on board, it can be, and I'm very, very happy that there are a lot of CVOs here who are OIE delegates from all over Africa. They are the ones who will take it to OIE and say, you know, we think in our area this is an issue. We need to revise that standard, or we need to enrich it this way, and so forth and so forth. I think that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your attention.